this time. Get your Arizona Concealed Carry Permit now with Arizona Concealed Carry Permit by Zanna Enterprises, LLC. Become a more responsible and educated gun owner. Carry legally concealed in 35 states. Carry permitted in restaurants where alcohol is served. Learn where and how you can legally carry a firearm in Arizona. Learn where you can use deadly force. When can you display your gun or not for self-defense? Learn how to deal with law enforcement while carrying a firearm. Learn how to be aware of your surroundings and how to avoid a confrontation. Buy your gun without waiting for a background check. Get your Arizona Concealed Carry Permit now. Go to www.azccw.us. Go to www.azccw.us. Free for single mothers and people with disabilities. Here we go, guys and girls. You're listening to Love, Guns and Freedom with Luca Zanna on K-Talks 1340 AM and on United States.FM network. Second hour, it is all about guns. You know, this hour is beyond guns. As you know, I don't really talk too much about the latest gun or what type of, fashion holster you should buy. I could not care less. This is for me mostly an hour that I would like to bring awareness about our rights, specifically the Second Amendment right, and of course, how to exercise it, at least learning from each other, try to improve each other. We talk about training, of course, classes, CCW classes, safety classes, tips, interviews, everything. And of course, sometimes, I also push my rifles and other things that I find interesting. But the most important thing really that we should never forget, that we are a very unique nation. Or at least we are supposed to be a very unique nation. When it comes down to Second Amendment, when it comes down to the militia, the armed citizen in the defense of the state, and also, of course, of the himself. It's not just the state. I really believe it's our human right to defend ourselves, our life. This is a very unique thing. Few states, few countries around the world have this type of situation. The only thing that comes to my mind a little bit is Switzerland, of course. But so I wanted to bring back on the show a gentleman that I really have the pleasure to be among my friends, Facebook friends. And sometimes people say, Facebook friends is a big word. Guess what? Sometimes I get more connected with some of my Facebook friends than people that live next door to me. Because the idea, it's beyond the geographical, limitations or distance. It's about an idea. We have something we share in common, the idea of individual rights, of freedom. And in this case, something very unique, especially when it comes down to a man who served this country, who served this republic, in something that is probably the only form of constitutional armed force, let's say, contemplated in our Constitution, and that's the Navy, U.S. Navy. So this gentleman is not just a regular guy. He's a guy also who gave a big part of his life serving as a Navy man. It wasn't just a guy running just being like a private. He did it as a career. So let me bring him on. His name is Mike, and I will leave it like that. He's a commander, at least retired commander, Mike. Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Luca.
All right, Commander Mike. How's it going there?
Well, it's going pretty well. It's a beautiful day here, wherever it is that I am. I won't say where that is.
Okay.
But it's really nice, though the weather hasn't been very nice for a while.
Beautiful. Listen, last time we talked, I had you on the show last time, but it was a very interesting interview. We talked about several things. You as an experience as a man who served in the Navy for many years, and also you gave him some different opinion about politics or your personal opinion about very, let's say, controversial topics, 9/11, the war, and things like that. Today I would like to go back to something that we did not have a chance to talk last time. It was exactly about, first of all, what really the Constitution says about the standing army. And of course, you as a Navy man, you have it's not an idea, this is not like an opinion, it's a fact. What exactly the Navy is according to the Constitution, because everything else, for what I understand, beside the Navy, it is not really contemplated in our Constitution, like the military, standing army, the U.S. Army, and all these things. They're not really never. Give us some education on the topic, because I like the fact that you're really informed about this. Tell us, please.
Well, and that's something that's pretty easy to address. All people have to do is go to the Constitution, and in Article 1, Section 8, there are two clauses which are important. Well, actually, there are more than two clauses. But if we're talking about the active duty military, if you will, then in Clause 12, one of Congress's powers and therefore responsibilities is to raise and support armies. But it's to raise and support them. It's not to keep them standing, because it says that no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. That's very important, even though they pretty much skirt around that now. The whole idea was that an army can't exist if it's not funded. And therefore, because the Founding Fathers were very skeptical of the idea of having standing armies, because standing armies with no defensive wars to fight ultimately get turned against the people. They saw it all throughout history, that they wanted to make sure that any standing army, any army that was raised wouldn't stay raised after its required use was finished. Then we come to Clause 13, which is interesting because it doesn't talk about raising or supporting a navy. It talks about to provide and maintain a navy.
Yes.
And so therefore it gives the suggestion that a navy should be indeed a standing force. Of course, navies often, at the time, at least American navies, were not ships generally that operated together unless they operated in very small groups called squadrons. They often went out and cruised the oceans on their own in order to keep the sea lanes open, so they wouldn't be a threat to the civilian population.
Yes, no, this is very important because I tell you, if I go out there on the streets, the average American person has no clue what you're talking about. And that's sad, because I think this is the foundation of our country. That's also what makes us different from, what's supposed to make us different from every other country out there. And unfortunately, now all the things you're saying, they are part pretty much of, let's say, almost like a fairy tale, and it's supposed not to, because after all, the Constitution is the law of the land. But where did we lose that? I mean, what exactly, sometimes, in times, our Congress completely started to disregard this very important foundation, because right now, look where we are. We are way far from that scenario that our founding fathers contemplated in the Constitution. Right now, we are living under the standing army. It's called Homeland Security. They have a billion rounds. They got tanks. They have armed force. And of course, we have different types of new legislation, like, National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, with different chapters that pretty much contemplates that the U.S. Army can be used on U.S. soil against terrorists. That pretty much make everybody does not agree with the government. What do you think? Where did we lose all this in past?
Well, I think it was a slow erosion. I think that before the Civil War, armies were raised, but there weren't standing armies, and even in the Civil War, there was a relatively small standing army, which is why you had West Point in the first place, in order to provide professional officers for some small center, cadre of that army. But I think after the Civil War, even then, a lot of that was stood down. And it didn't reemerge again, I would say, at least on a very large scale, until probably after the Spanish-American War, or even maybe more so with World War I and after World War I. I think there are a lot of people who would disagree with me. I think a lot of people would probably say that it was really the result of an aftermath of World War II. But it's been kind of, the army would be small and expand for a war, and then contract, and then expand again, and when it contracted, it didn't get as small as it was before that conflict, and then it would do it again and again and again, and so you basically have this big sort of wave where the crests just keep getting bit higher and the troughs keep getting higher too.
And so this is just to be clear, Navy was never part of this standing army. That's why the Navy was always something contemplated in the Constitution. It's the only armed branch of our armed force that is constitutional. Am I right or wrong?
Well, I would argue that the Navy, if you include the Marine Corps, that's true.
Yes.
Because one of the things, of course, that they talk about from time to time, even the Marines themselves do, is making a Marine Corps that's separate from the Navy. Mm-hmm. But the Marine Corps is supposed to be basically it wasn't even a landing force for the Navy until Jefferson was president, and it became a landing force at that point. But up until that point, and certainly also afterwards, their primary function was to aid the sailors when the sailors would board another ship and go in hand-to-hand combat.
Yes. And I would like to bring one thing. People say, wow, are you giving us a history lesson? No, this is not history. This is supposed to be who we are. If you believe that we are in a constitution, let's say we are a constitutional republic, and really it is the law of the land, we're supposed to bring back this idea that is not an idea, it's the law. But the point is, if we don't get education out there, and we understand exactly what the Constitution says, we cannot even have a conversation with our elected representative to say, wait a second, I know probably now we are way past that moment where we have a military-industrial complex that pretty much took over. They're going to laugh at us if you say, yeah, right, you think we're going to go away? But still, at least we need to try. We must try. We must know what we're supposed to be. And the problem, what is? What are the repercussions when we have now an out-of-control, let's say, military-industrial complex? That doesn't mean it's our military. This is a corporation. There are corporations like President Eisenhower warned us. They're pretty much controlling the military, and more important, they push the agenda because they need to keep this business going. That means more unconstitutional act of wars around the world, so we can keep the money coming for them, of course. So that's the point. I mean, at least for me, because at the end of the day, why do we talk about this, Michael? I mean, what really can we do?
Well, actually, I would even take it a step back. I would go right to the term citizen, because you used, for instance, the idea that not only is the Constitution supposed to be the law of the land, but that we are different from other countries.
Yeah.
In other countries, at least before the United States was founded, or should I say before the several states of what then became united into the United States was founded, was that people were subjects; they weren't citizens. But in these states, people weren't subjects; people were citizens. And the difference is that when you're a subject, you're essentially owned by whatever rules the country.
Exactly.
When you're a citizen, the government is supposed to work for you. But the flip side of that is that you have responsibilities to defend that, in this case, republic.
Exactly.
And that's where we come into the whole concept of militias and the whole idea of standing armies being dangerous to liberty, and most importantly, individual liberty, because there's no such thing other than individual liberty.
Exactly.
Without the individual, you have nothing, and if people don't understand that they are citizens and that they have both rights and responsibilities to defend their rights, then tyranny takes over.
Yes, and this is, because I would like to go back to the fact why we have a Second Amendment. And let me read it one more time. Everybody probably knows about it, but I like always to refresh the mind, at least to give it my interpretation. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, there is always the new agenda to try to make it look like this is some sort of a collective right, because after all, they say a well-regulated militia. No. Even me, a moron from Italy, who barely can speak English sometimes, the right of the people, first of all, says, people didn't say of the state, say of the people, to keep or bear arms shall not be infringed. And more important, if we believe that the Bill of Rights, like for example, the First Amendment, it's an individual right, every other right enunciated in the Bill of Rights, it's an individual right. So the argument out there that just because they mention the word militia means only that the National Guard, by the way, was created way later, did not even exist at the time when the Bill of Rights was written. So this is an individual right for me, black and white. And I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think what you think about this. But my point is now, question is, should the citizen have the same type of firepower, besides few exceptions? I'm not talking about the idiot that brings always the topic, now what, you're going to have the nuclear bomb? No, that's not an individual right, okay? That's another thing. But let's put it in this way, full automatic weapons, shoulder-mounted weapons, things like that, even a little, armored vehicle. Should the citizen have the same arms as the military? Question mark. And I posted an article a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago, that I had a lot of good feedback about it, and that was about Army Secretary nominee, that by the way didn't make it. He was talking about that according to his opinion, the citizen should have the same arms as the military. And the guy that I was talking about is Tennessee State Senator Mark Green, that Trump was trying to bring him as Army Secretary, but I think he didn't make it. What do you think? What is your opinion?
Well, I think we have to go right back and look at who it is that's supposed to be making up the Army and the militia in the first place. Those are supposed to be citizens. So how can you have a citizenry that's supposed to be, invoked to, defend their states and their towns and their communities, unless they can keep and bear arms? It's like, what if I can't get to the armory to get my weapon? It's absurd.
Yes.
The idea that people cannot keep and bear arms themselves is absurd. And the other part is that if they're going to be proficient with those arms, they have to have them, close by enough that they can not only drill, perhaps together, but also individually in order to practice their marksmanship. And when I say marksmanship, not necessarily only with small arms. That could be with fighter planes, that could be with artillery, it could be with a lot of different things, as long as they are, doing it in pursuit of freedom and not trying to infringe on other people's property and rights.
Yeah, let's talk about the Swiss model. I was hanging around Switzerland before I left to America. I had a girlfriend there, and I like it. It's kind of interesting because there, yes, they are regulated, by the way, not because you have a full automatic a rifle at your house means that you can start to, that first of all, that's property of the state, but you still need to, let's say, fulfill and train and keep it in some sort of a standard. Not because now, let's say, you can have that type of firepower means that you just go out and go crazy. No, when you become part of the organized militia, like in Switzerland, you have to train, you have to follow a standard, you have to also organize according to, let's say, it is a really armed force, organized armed force. So now the point is, there is, for example, in Arizona, we have the organized militia, under the, let's say, the control of the supposed to be the governor. And then there is the unorganized militia. Is also, let's say, in our constitution, we also have what is called the unorganized militia, that being everybody between the age of technically 18 and 45, if I remember well, it is part. And at that point, go ahead.
Well, actually, what I would say is that that was a perfect segue. But first, we have to actually go back to this whole idea of individuals, keeping and bearing arms, because in the Constitution, again, in Article 1, Section 8, it talks about how Congress has a responsibility to make rules for the organizing and disciplining of the militia.
Yes.
And so therefore, if you're a member of the militia, whether it's the disorganized militia or it's the organized militia, then if you abuse your right to keep and bear arms, there are direct and probably military consequences.
Yeah. I mean,
this is not just a bunch of ragtag people. Laws do apply to them, but they're not supposed to be laws that infringe on their rights.
Yeah, for example, when I look at the first real infringement on our Second Amendment, at least on mass scale, it was the 1934 NFA, National Firearm Act. Do you agree with me? I mean, that was, for me, at least the first real unconstitutional act of Congress that's pretty much just say, okay, now you civilians, you're not allowed anymore to have certain type of, let's say, weapons unless you go through a special, very expensive at time taxation system. The typical stamp is $200. Now it's not that much, but at the time it was huge. And more important, it's not more a right, becomes a privilege. Do you agree with me? There was any other type of legislation before that comes to your mind that was really, let's say, aiming at curbing or at least destroying the original idea of the Second Amendment, that also we as a citizen, we're supposed to have pretty much the same type of fire powers that our military is supposed to have. What do you think?
Well, I think that was the biggie. That was the first one that I know of. My guess is that during the Civil War or Reconstruction, there were some sorts of unconstitutional laws that were applied to Southerners, but I can't be sure of that.
Anyway, that's pretty bad. That for sure is pretty bad. We're still paying the consequences. Now, if you have, let's say, a barrel of a shotgun that it's half inch, I'm not even talking about, much, half inch or a quarter of half inch shorter than the side's supposed to be, let's say 18 inches, you are becoming a felon. I mean, same story with I'm not even talking about full automatic. Just the fact that the barrel, it's half inch shorter, your life is gone. I mean, that's for me still shocking.
It's silly. We've given away our country to lawyers.
Yeah, and
bureaucrats. What's the difference between a barrel that's half an inch shorter or half an inch longer? Basically nothing.
Yeah, 5 years in jail. That was
it's not more accurate. It's not it's not easier to wield. It's not even easier to hide. It's a half inch.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of pistols that you can do that with, or in many cases, and I'm not sure about that specific one, you can just pay a big licensing fee and do it anyway.
Yeah. So that's, for me, it's like almost a conditioning, The moment that they make you admit, like, for example, I always say it's so important, the idea that for me, the seatbelt, it's one of the biggest, let's say, surrender that we did. Because regardless, we believe or not, the seatbelt can be good for your health, okay, or your safety. The moment that the government tells you, hey, your body is, we own your body. You belong to us because I tell you what is good for you. That's the bottom line. We surrender our body. And at that point, we surrender our freedom. And the same story, now at that point, the sky is the limit. Now they can tell you, hey, half inch out of that barrel, if you don't jump, as I say, even if it sounds stupid, you spend 5 years in jail and your life is ruined because we say so. As simple as that.
Indeed.
At that point, we submitted to that. Next time it's going to be, why not 5 inches? Why not maybe 8? You don't need a gun, period. So that's my point. I think there was a slow, something that makes you feel good, reasonable. Not really for me, but for the average person, after all, it's reasonable. The Mafia, 1934, the Valentine Massacre, all this stuff. And people buy the crap. And then guess what? Now you become a very, your life is ruined. And forget about the half inch. There are people out there we had people that really decent human beings, just because your rifle, by accident, not even your fault, by manufacturing problems, it starts to jump and start to go in full auto for 2 or 3 rounds. And guess what? Somebody was reported. That was, I think, if I well remember, was with Olympic Firearms a few years ago. This guy was a National Guard retired guy, and his life was ruined. He didn't do anything wrong. Even the factory said, by the way, it's our fault. Guess what? ATF threw the book at him, and they convicted him. And, it's sad because I am, people say, oh, wow, look, you are a gun manufacturer. You work with ATF. Are you an hypocrite? No, I'm not. I know exactly who they are. I don't like them. I want to be honest. I know they listen to my show, some of them, and they come to do my inspection probably. But guys, nothing personal with you. But for me, you're working for the devil. And the only reason why I'm comply, because I want to try to give guns to American people. I try to make guns, and this is the system now. I cannot rewrite the law. I'm not nobody. I'm just a regular guy. So I don't want to let's say, spending my time in jail, but I try to comply with your stupid laws, and I'll do everything I can. But at the same time, let me tell you where I stand. I think ATF and many of these three letters agency, they should pretty much never be in existence. That's what I believe. We should go back to 1934, before 1934 Act or NFA. So that's my opinion. So I want to be clear, yes, I comply with those rules because I don't want to give them the opportunity to put me on a cross and bleed me to death. At the same time, my heart is that, hey, this is not really what's supposed to be. Hopefully, with peaceful process of educating people, we can go back the way we were. So everybody asks me about why do you work as a gun manufacturing? Why? That's how, guys, because I got to make a living too. And more important, even if I don't have to, this is not something I really need to. I like it. I like to make guns, and I like to give them to law-abiding people out there. That's my job. Go ahead.
Well, there you go. And the other part of it is the education. See, I think that if people are educated about their rights and their history, because a lot of people have no idea what things used to be like. How would they? If they're not taught the Constitution, whether it's at home or whether it's in a school, and they're not becoming part of a militia, and when I say that, I mean an organized militia, within the state, or within their own towns, for that matter. Then how are they learning both their rights and their responsibilities when it comes to defending their property and helping to defend their neighbor's property? Mm-hmm. And when I say property, that includes the neighbors and their families and everything themselves. Now, don't misunderstand me. I mean that sounds very collectivist, but what I really mean is cooperative, not collectivist.
Yes, I understand. Listen, any things would you like to share about the latest updates on general American foreign policy, or something that pretty much, we were talking last time? Any things you see changing for the better, changing for the worst, or there is not really any change? Everything goes the same way like the old boss?
I don't see a whole lot of change. I would like to go back, though, to the Militia Act of 1958. We talked a little bit about the active forces and what they're supposed to do, and as far as how long they're supposed to exist, and appropriations and things like that, and the fact that armies are not supposed to be standing, but that the Navy and by extension the Marine Corps are. I'd like to look at those those clauses in the original Constitution, and then the resulting law, which the most recent of which is the Militia Act of 1958, which goes to bring those into practice. Under Clause 14, we talked about that the Congress is supposed to make rules for the government and regulations of the land and naval forces, but in Clause 15, it starts to talk about the militia, and it says to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Okay, and we think about that as the National Guard, which is the way it's used now, because that is indeed the active militia, but it also says to provide for organizing, this is Clause 16, arming and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So what they do, therefore, they're not only supposed to provide for organizing and disciplining the militia, they're supposed to arm it.
Yes.
So how do they arm it without people actually having the right to keep and bear arms? Which takes us to how they most recently proposed to do that, which is under the Militia Act of 1958. If you ask the guy on the street when the last Militia Act it was, they'll say, maybe 1900, maybe like 1850, but a real long time ago. Well, Granted, 1958 isn't within my lifetime, but it certainly is within my wife's lifetime and a whole lot of people I know.
Yeah.
So it's really not that long ago.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And so it talks about the militia composition and classes. The militia of the United States consists of all able-bodied males at least 17 years of age, and except as provided in Section 313 of Title 32, under 45 years of age who are or have made a declaration of intention to become citizens of the United States, and of female citizens of the United States who are members of the National Guard. So therefore, everybody, and not even just citizens.
Yes.
But let's see, every male, able-bodied male, between the age of 17 and 45 is in the militia, whether he knows it or not.
Exactly. That's very important. And like even in Arizona, in our state constitution, we have the same provision, pretty much similar. And even people say, the militia, they try to, by design, by the way, the last 30, 40 years, they try to make us like the word militia, like it's a bad word, like you eat babies for breakfast. Maybe we forgot this country was founded upon the sacrifice of men and also some women in different roles, of course, that they were part of the militia. That's the point. We didn't have really a standing army, besides some exception, but the point, most of the fight and struggle was by regular people, brothers, sisters, father and sons, fighting together, as a militia. And that's exactly who are we today too. I mean, the militia is not a bad word. Now they're going to make us look like, you're a bunch of right-wingers, that you bombs, federal building. That's another part of the propaganda. I already had on my show here a lot of information about what I consider really, and I'm behind this war, something that is called also false flag when it comes down to Timothy McVeigh and things like that. At least a bunch of lies. We didn't really get all the truth there. But regardless, the militia is not a bad word. The militia means you, yourself, your brother, your father, your man next to you, your neighbor. We are the militia.
But what it does also, though, is bring forth the Second Amendment. It makes it live, because how can you be a member of the militia and every able-bodied male basically who passes through the country in a way, between the ages of 17 and 45 is part of that militia? How do you be part of that militia without keeping and bearing arms?
Exactly. If you don't have those, it's like it's an illusion. Like what? They're gonna give you a plastic gun to be part of the militia, but that's the point. And I like also the idea that there is a private ownership. One thing, for example, I don't mind. Don't get me wrong. Some weapons, if you are training with a common good let's say to defend the state, I think government should give you those type of opportunity. That is not an opportunity. It's also the tools that you need. Like for example, in Switzerland, all these rifles and different accessories, not just a rifle. They have different weapons that you have at home. They are paid by the tax dollar, because that's technically part of the government. But at the same time, I also like the idea, because, for example, in Switzerland, you will be given that specific rifle, and that's fine. But when you start to have a private ownership, that becomes difficult, because at that point you gotta go through permits and different things that is not really that different from other parts of Europe. So I like the idea here that we have both. We have the right to keep and bear arms as individuals. We're supposed to have it without all these permits, like in many states we do, of course. And then at the same time, we're supposed to have something that we lost, in my opinion, that the government, if we are really part of the militia, should give us the tools that we need to defend this republic. It is more than just our private rifle. It's supposed to be everything we're supposed to have as an armed force.
And it says so right there in the Constitution, which we discussed before.
Yes, perfect.
It says that it's the government's responsibility to arm and train the militia. And, of course, we haven't really talked about the classes of the militia. I mean, you did briefly at the beginning, but there are two. There's the organized militia, which consists of the National Guard and the Naval Militia, and I'm reading right from the Militia Act of 1948. Of 1958, and the unorganized militia, which consists of the members of the militia who are not members of the National Guard or the Naval Militia. So this means everybody, every able-bodied male between the ages of 17 and 45, And, people talk about, well, what about people's right to bear arms for people who are, mentally handicapped, crazy, whatever? Well, that all comes under able-bodied. Mm-hmm. And so because the majority of people are always going to be able-bodied, then there can be some sort of screening process, at least for the militia itself. But if you're already in the militia, this means that most of the people would be armed, not only the ones who specifically want to be.
Yes.
And I think the more that people are exposed to firearms, the less afraid they are of them, and the more likely they are to want to keep and bear arms.
Yes. This information is very good, because I tell you, I'm having an opportunity to learn. I heard already about these things, but now I really like to go deep into this. For example, the things that they're really important when we have also a conversation about our rights, it's just beyond the typical, let's say, gun owners topics. Oh, I have a gun because I want to defend myself, my family, I go hunt. No, this is not about hunting. It's not about your personal defense. Yeah, that's part two, and is an indirect consequence. But we have a lot of more information here, Now, for example, Militia Act 1958. There is also the Militia Act of 1903, also called the Dix Act. Did you ever heard about that?
Yes, I really don't know about it because when I went looking several years ago to educate myself on the Militia Act, I wanted to look for the most recent one.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so I wasn't looking so much for the history as I was looking for what applies to everybody now.
Yes, and that's very important. You're right. But at the same time, it's all part of the process, because for me, it's like at the end of the day, more we know is better it is. At least everybody I invite, go out there, put Militia Act 1903, also called Dix Act. It was a legislation enacted by the United States Congress, which codified the circumstances under which the National Guard could be federalized. Okay, and look how far we are from now. Now we have National Guard. The last few years under the Bush administration, they are controlling the borders of Iraq. Okay, I honestly, let's say I wanted to join the National Guard. The idea that I can be sent as a armed force overseas, that's not really exactly the idea of National Guard. That's Iraq or foreign guard. So why we are so far? Go ahead.
Agreed. And what's happened is, this is not the first time this has happened. I don't know about before World War. I don't know about World War I, though. I think they did call up some National Guard for World War I. Of course, we weren't in World War I for very long, so perhaps they didn't. But they called up National Guard units for World War II. They called them up for Korea. They called them up for Vietnam. So it doesn't make it any more right. It's just that there's a long history of abuse, taking the militia and using it for things that it has no business being used for.
Yes. All right, listen, Michael, Commander Michael, how's your life, retired life? Are you enjoying your life as a retired man?
Shall I say it's interesting? I'm getting back to my roots a little bit. I've been exercising more and running, and I was never a runner. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually enjoying that, but I have to admit I enjoy it a lot more when I have someone to chat with as I'm running, because it keeps me from going too fast to make it useful, and also it makes the time really flash by.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad you enjoy life, and also I'm glad you're sharing your experience, your information, because that's the only way. I seriously, sometimes I always I'm sad when I see people that try to dismiss us just because the topic, and they think. Sometimes I always say, especially if I talk about this stuff, people say, "Look, shut up! You're a conspiracy theory." When it comes from a man like yourself, that you've been serving this country, you really you were a retired commander in the Navy. So I think this is very important for the average person out there to understand this information. It's real. It is not just some book out there in your library. This is part of why we are losing all our rights, because we are lacking knowledge. And only if we inform population, understand who we are, what are our rights, at that point we have a chance to take it back. And otherwise we're going to lose everything here. So listen, I want to thank you. Go ahead.
agree, and this experiment of freedom in America has always been one that's been very fragile, because it's never, something like this has never succeeded anywhere in the world before. And honestly, I don't think that the people who founded it really believed it was going to survive as long as it has. But if there's complacency and ignorance, there's no way that we can continue. We will become the same as any other tin pot dictatorship that there's ever been in the world.
Exactly.
And that would be a real shame.
And that's why I always say, no matter what, sometimes even the odds, sometimes I get a little demoralized looking at the big picture. I say, what are you trying to do, Luca? You're just a stupid local radio show there. Guess what? I do everything I can. Even if 2 people listen to me and maybe I wake up one, I'll be happy. At least I try. Listen, Michael, thank you very much. Let's be in touch. And I would like to say, everybody, don't go away. We still have to finish the second hour. We have some news about guns and some great ideas. And more important, the Skady, the new AR-15 upper and rifle, ready to rock by Zan Enterprises. Yes, it's my stuff. Don't go away. You're listening to Love Guns and Freedom with Luca Zan.
Don't tread on us.
Do you want social justice? Now I give you social justice. The Zana way. Don't trade on us. The Freedom Rifle by Zana. The most affordable military-grade semi-automatic AR-15 rifle in M4 configuration. Chambered in 223 Wild that can shoot both 5.56 NATO and 223 Remington. 4 minutes of angle for just $499, made in the USA. Get your Freedom Rifle now. We need every law-abiding American armed with knowledge and at least one military rifle, ready to defend good against evil. With every Don't Tread on Us rifle, you will get free parchment replica of the United States Constitution, free digital CD Don't Tread on Us, free ebook How to Become a Rifleman, free t-shirt Slaves Are Never Armed, I Am Not a Slave, free 30 rounds magazine where allowed by the law, free laser engraved ejection port Don't Trade on Us for just $499. Go to www.freedomrifle.com, www.freedomrifle.com. Get your Freedom Rifle now. Here we go, back into the studio. You're listening to Love, Guns and Freedom with Luca Zanna on K-Talks 1340 AM. Yes, I'm not tired tonight. I know you will listen to the show on Sunday, but I'm recording this segment exactly Saturday night. And it's exactly right now about probably 11 o'clock. This is the last segment I'm recording for today's show. So my point is very simple. More I think about the show, it's like a journey. It's like always like giving birth to something, even if it's just 3 hours. But I don't just go out there and start to talk about the weather or stuff like that. It's a process. There are things that are happening. It's like always to try to find the inspiration also to what to bring you. It's living like a little message in the bottle also for posterity somehow. And I'm not saying here we're trying to do miracles. No, but every time I bring you a guest, I bring you somebody, I'm trying to put on record the struggle some of us, many of us, I may say, but unfortunately not enough, otherwise things will be different, are trying to do when it comes down to regaining our freedoms, to stop this corruption, to stop all this globalism. So that's the point. Maybe for me personally, it is not anymore about the show itself. It's not about what I say today or what you listen today. Maybe it's about to put in this sort of almost bottles, messages in the bottles for posterity. Our struggle, our attempts. Hopefully, I want to believe we will be successful at the end. But yes, it is a struggle. So that's probably the only reason why I'm not going to quit the show. Because many times I say, why am I doing this? I have pretty much a busy life. I have a lot of things I enjoy doing it. I don't really need this. Yes, it is just 3 hours a week, but guess what? Preparing it, producing it, the guest, the phone calls. It takes a lot of hours out of my personal life, I must tell you. Yes, I do enjoy it because it is also for me another way to to communicate with some of you that probably I would never met in my life. And I know you out there, you're listening. Maybe we'll never meet in this life, but somehow, even I don't know you, I feel like I'm knowing you. I feel like there is a connection. So it's something beyond the show at this point. It's like probably it's a media to communicate, to share who we are. It is not just about me. When I bring you on the show, it is about you. That's why I would like to have you on the show. When you do something that is connected, what we're talking here, try to educate others, to inspire others. When it comes down to personal freedoms, when it comes down to exposing the New World Order, when it comes down to exposing the terrible, evil acts they're doing to us, from the vaccination, to the GMO food, to the chemtrails, to everything you can imagine, to these illegal wars, to destruction of the basic human rights, starting from the First Amendment to the Second Amendment, the Third, the Fourth Amendment, and everything else. It is beyond this show for me. So, as I said, sometimes it's a little tough. Because I tell you, I would probably right now stay in bed and reading a book or in company, whatever I want to do. But as I said, we keep going. Now, as you know, another task I do, beside this show, I started to collaborate with the Kingma Daily Miner. And I'm pretty proud of it because, after all, for me to write for an official newspaper, even as a contributor, it's kind of humbling and also makes me feel proud. After all, listen to me, can barely sometimes speak English correctly. To write it, well, I must tell you, I'm pretty humble that somebody's listening or reading my stuff. So I'm very happy. And more important, my goal is not about me being happy, but the goal is to try to reach out as many people as we can to educate, to become a more responsible, safer, and even more, let's say, skillful gun owners. That's the idea. So that's what I'm doing. Now, next week, exactly should be on Tuesday, on the Kingma Daily Miner, is going to be another article. When it comes down to the topic that I think is very important, after the safety, what is the next thing we would like to do when it comes down to be a gun owner or any type of, you don't need to have a gun, even if you have a knife, even if you have just empty hands. As a decent human being, what is the most important that you would like to do when it comes down to a violent confrontation? You would like to avoid it. We are not here to be macho men. We are not here to prove any point. Honestly, a decent human being should avoid violence every time it's possible. That's my humble thing. I mean, doesn't mean that you're a victim. Doesn't mean that you need to die. Doesn't mean that you're going to be there and, somebody can walk over you. At the same time, there's a point when you understand the consequences of stupidity, that from just something that could be just an innocent, stupid act, unfortunately, things can degenerate. From a punch can become a stab. From a stab can become a shot. So my point is, how can we avoid a gunfight or a violent confrontation? First of all, I would like to say, attitude is the most important thing. As I said many times, I can teach you everything. Well, at least I can share with you other information, what to do, how not to do things, when it comes down to guns, gun safety, gun proficiency, everything you want. But one thing I cannot be able to really teach you is attitude. It must be within you. And what is the first thing in attitude we want to learn? First of all, to be humble. Somebody's trying to tell you something. Don't do like when it comes to guns that you know it all, because nobody really knows everything. And if you think you know it all, shut up for a moment and listen. Maybe you say, yeah, I already know this stuff, but thank you very much. Most of the time, people who knows everything, guess what? They're the one that know nothing. And they're scary, because with guns can be very dangerous. Now, when it comes down attitude with a violent confrontation, attitude probably would solve 90% of the confrontation. And you want to avoid them. That's the spirit. We're not talking about, a bunch of kids, slapping each other. We're talking about something that could degenerate in an arrest, in your seriously bodily harm, even death. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to fight over a parking space? Is it worth it to fight because, somebody called your wife a name? Or even your mother? And don't get me wrong, this has come from a guy when I was in Italy. I grew up in boarding schools since I was 11. Then I somehow went from boarding school to the military school. And I tell you, it was a pretty tough environment. I mean, I'm not saying that I went to war, but guess what? We used to fist fight every other day. Sometimes for very stupid things. Yes, thank God, nobody really got seriously hurt. I tell you, blood was spilling everywhere. Punches, bites. You call my mother a name, bang. Oh, you want me to do something, what? Make your bed, bang. So it was pretty much my uprising as a child. Don't get me wrong, that's who I am. I'm not your slave. Even when I was a kid and I was smaller than my, seniors, I never really bowed down to anybody. But at the same time, I say sometimes it would be worth it to avoid a confrontation. Somebody called your name, you don't need to go there. So this is very important, more important when you are a gun owner. It's a completely different game. This is not anymore about proving a point. The point is that the gun is the tool of last resort, and the moment that you have a gun on you, even if you go in a simple fist fight, that would be simple. When if you are just unarmed, that could become, from a misdemeanor, could become a felony. So be careful. What I'm trying to say today, we will talk about this article next Sunday. But the point is our attitude could save, could change, could avoid completely any type of confrontation. Even just being gentle, even just a little smile, even just don't be confrontational. That would be. Now, there are two different, of course, of, let's say, criminals in this case. Now we go down to criminals, because attitude is something you can avoid the sparkle between the two idiots. And when it comes down to criminals, we have the opportunity criminals, also what I call them the coyotes. Then there are the dedicated criminals, the hardcore criminals, what I call them the wolves. Think about it. Coyotes, they are pretty much cowards. They go around in pack, and they want to find the easy prey. But if you're aware, if you're strong enough, even just the way you don't look like a prey anymore, you're alert, they probably don't want to deal with that. They want the easy prey, the clueless prey, somebody they can jump easily on and do what they have to do and get out. Then there is, of course, the hardcore criminal, what you call the wolf. Well, that's different. The wolf, even if he smells that you will put a resistance, doesn't matter. He probably enjoyed a little bit the fight. It will come after you. That's the criminal that, of course, you always must be alert. You must be aware. At least you have a plan. At least you have that moment of being proactive rather than being reactive. But that's good for any reason, for any type of confrontation. Even if you had to deal with the coyotes, you always want to be proactive. So what comes down to, how to avoid these confrontations? First of all, attitude. Then we have de-escalation. Well, we can de-escalate things sometimes. Just say, sorry, I didn't mean that. Sorry that you just stole my parking space. I understand. Let's move on. So that's important. Awareness, it is something that must be part of our lifestyle from now on, especially when you become a gun owner. When you are aware, you can see things are coming to you before they're really happening. When they're already on top of you, I don't care how fast you are, I don't care how strong you are, you're already going to be always half second too late with your gun. So that's something to consider. And I will talk to you about more this, about the color of awareness, more specifically, how to create a discipline in you, to be aware of your surrounding, to create a plan, to avoid a confrontation, and to be always in a proactive mode. Now, other things to avoid the confrontation. Let's avoid wrong people. If you're around losers, if you're around people that they are, hanging around with criminals, you will hang around with the wrong people. Don't do that. Same story, avoiding wrong places. Yes, it's really important to go at 2 o'clock at night downtown, unless you have really an emergency. I don't know, maybe you have to go to the pharmacy, if that's the only pharmacy you have. Why otherwise you should driving around downtown at 2 o'clock in the morning? Or because I can, or because I'm armed now. Guess what? Yeah, I understand that. But pretty much that you will put yourself in a situation that would be, first of all, best case scenario, you're going to get pulled by the cops. You really want to have a meeting with them at 2 o'clock at night? And I'm saying that, no, that's right. But, maybe they can find something. Your car doesn't look right. You're going a little too fast and they will pull you over. So my point is, avoid the situation. Now, avoid dangerous situation. And also avoid regular patterns. Somebody, that you are some sort in the public eye, don't do always the same route. Don't do always the same time coming back at home, the same place, same street. Be a little bit creative there, okay? Now, avoiding antagonizing. And this part also, do not respond to provocations. Many times people may provoke you. They say, you, come here, let's be a man, face me. What is the point? What is the point? Is there something that is really being some sort of an immediate danger? No, it's just being a jerk. It just want to bring you in, lure you in. Maybe he's a loser. It's something to lose. Maybe he already has felony. Maybe he's already he cannot even carry a gun. Why you have to go there and maybe put yourself in a situation you may lose what you have to lose? It could be your home, could be, your girlfriend, could be your eye, maybe your life, even your health. You get smashed on the head with a rock. Trust me, you're not going to feel well. So that's my point. Do not respond to provocations. Unless somebody's in front of you, unless somebody's cornering you, you have no other ways. That's different then. If they start that fight and you have no other options, you will be the one to finish it. I never said that you must be a sheep or a coward. At the same time, you must be smart. That's the point. You never start it. They will start it, but you will finish it when you have no other options. And we will go there also when it comes down to the combat mindset. Now, another very important thing is keeping the distance and looking for an escape route. Yes, distance is your friend, especially when you have a gun and you have training. Everybody can somehow squeeze the trigger at 3 yards, 5 yards and hit you, even if they keep the gun upside down like the gangs would. No training, yeah, they can hit you. But if you are beyond 10, 15 yards, well, you must know the magic tricks about side alignment, side picture, trigger control. Focus on the front sight. Hopefully the scumbags out there don't know this stuff, and you do. You can perform at 15, 20 yards even if you have to 25 yards hitting the target. So that's my point. Keep the distance. And look always for an escape route. Doesn't matter if you're in the car or if you're at the restaurant. Always know where is the exit. All right, we will go more into details with this, continuing also with the color of awareness next Sunday. Meanwhile, I would like to tell you, be ready for our number 3. Incredible guest from New Zealand. Great lady. She had been my show a few weeks ago. We'll talk about how to defend ourselves, not just from scumbags and criminals, but from the biggest criminal, probably, government, and from the agencies from the government that are letting happen all these attacks, chemical attacks, biological attacks on us, our humanity. All right, don't forget, next Sunday I have at Lake Havasu a class of a CCW class at Havasu Guns. Okay, havasuguns.com, contact them, CCW class. I'll be there. Do not go away. You're listening to Love, Guns, and Freedom with Luca Zanna.
You're listening to Love, Guns, and Freedom with Luca Zanna on United States.fm network.